So I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, Rick Goings. For visitors who may not be familiar with American slang and aphorisms, I want to teach you one. We have a saying that you can't just walk the walk. You can't just talk the talk. You have to walk the walk. And Rick Goings has been a promoter of women's economic equality his entire business career. He has not just talked the talk, he has walked the walk. While under his leadership, over the past 15 years, Tupperware Brands has created a job, a new job, a first job for hundreds of thousands of women around the world. He has tirelessly promoted the idea that women deserve equal pay and that women are as capable as men of doing work and being paid for it. He has promoted this message as places as diverse as Asia, Africa, women's programs at Davos, and in addition to this, Rick has reached down to the youngest of women, to girls, and helped start Boys and Girls Clubs, where girls for the first time can be introduced to the idea of their power. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce a friend and a powerful advocate for women, Rick Goings.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And the gang of 21 leaders, I enjoyed so much half the day with you guys yesterday. And I'm only sorry that we didn't get to spend more time, but I got a lot out of it as well. Jim, I've got to say a salute to you for not only the vision, but the generosity to start this presidential precinct. And I was confused as to what this was going to be all about when we first started talking about support. And the more we've gotten involved, the more impressed I am. And I'll tell you, you guys are the product of it. If we can come up with some ideas to add value to you. Remember I told you the first thing I write on my buck card every morning, guys, yesterday? AV, add value. If we can add some value to what you're doing with a learn and return, then this is all very much worthwhile. So let me build off what you've heard. And Professor, I tell you, I called her initially Dr. J. And I said, but that plays to a basketball audience, and they call you Professor J, but you really did set up the situation. And I think, too, President Ryan, his comment about bridges, I want you to hold that thought in your mind, because as we get into some of the ideas I want to share with you, it is about bridges, and it's about bridges to various constituencies. Susan, my wife, and I, for many years, have been members and honored to be a part of a real inner circle at the World Economic Forum and Davos. And I've got to say that as I look at it, 10 years ago, and this was frustrating, there wasn't a single subject on gender parity in the entire Congress Hall or on any women's issues. And I would do interviews, business interviews and other kinds of interviews. And I remember one interview I did, I said, I'm pretty certain I won't be invited back this next year because of my criticism of let's get this agenda right. So that's not good news about Davos, moving very slowly. And you know what the whole stated objective of Davos is? To improve the state of the world. How in the world can you not include half the world's population? I've got a friend who we often do panels together at Davos, Nick Kristof, and Nick writes for the New York Times, and his wife Cheryl Wudong, they wrote an incredible book called Half the Sky. And the whole concept is women hold up half the sky. So a number of us, we built a group that barked and growled, some men and some very powerful women there in January of Davos. Actually, this 10 years ago, and I'm proud to report progress. Last year, there were more than a dozen events that had to do with women, gender parity, and the future of work and her participation in the economic and environment. Importantly, too, we really say that it's happening elsewhere, and it has happened now at Davos. It's one of the 10 ideas of their major focuses of all the work that the World Economic Forum, and it is gender parity. So some progress there. I want to come off Professor Jay's comments, though, about that's the state of things. And back to building bridges. What the heck do we do with this, though? Because if we wait now for governments to do it, for most corporations to do it, and for most NGOs to do it, there's not going to be much progress. Even after wars, when they bomb all the bridges, the first thing they do when they're going to retake ground again is build pontoon bridges. Find a way to start where you are with what you have. And that's what I want to share with you. I want to start with you 3 ideas, and I'm going to prep it up front for those who might be critics of, well, that's not all inclusive. I was a navigator in the Navy, and one of the things I learned as a navigator, there is no true north. Even then, when we would see true north, there would be a 3% magnetic compass variation, which meant you would end up in Lisbon rather than in Rota, Spain. But you start with some things, and if this isn't the bright light, it's a place to start. It's a place to put the flag. We have a wonderful, he's become a dear friend, young guy, recruited him through our head of global women's issues, Eleanor Steele, Steinova Fenna. We just promoted him to president of Europe, Africa, Middle East, early 40s, Norwegian. But he always has a theme on moving and progress. He always says TNT. And it sounds like an explosive element, but it's an attitude. It's today, not tomorrow. Everything Steinova does is today, not tomorrow, and looking for those. So let me share with you these 3 ideas. Number 1, I'm suggesting we come up with a new narrative with regard to gender parity. Sure, I mean, who doesn't know social justice is part of it? But I think we've got to shift from thinking about knocking down it as a barrier to a new way of thinking, leveraging it as an opportunity of just what happens. You heard President Ryan talk about it. You heard Professor Jay. If you engage women, it's opportunity. So then we talk about building that. You got to build an economic and a business case for it. And the gang, yesterday morning, we did toward the end, I introduced a word, responsibility. And I was so pleased of the way it resonated, because I said, you know, you mention that word responsibility to most people, and it's a word of burden rather than empowerment. And we bifurcate the word, and I do in seminars, and we talk about responsibility. That's what they teach Navy SEALs, to always have the ability to respond. And that's why when you start to make the case of the opportunity, then you start to get different things. And then you start working on what are the things that in fact can give her the ability to respond. And who do you build bridges with? Now, yes, we continue to communicate with governments, NGOs, businesses, but that all happens too slowly, as some of the populist new governments around the world are starting to say, you want to get effective, more effective in the world? Go right to the people. I'll give you an idea. Indonesia, largest Muslim population in the world. By law, he is the head of the family. Now it's interesting, it's a different kind of Islam because it came from India, so it's a softer kind of Islam. But we've been doing business there 18 years. in the 25 years that I've been running this company, I'll tell you, I've seen marked changes, but I've got to tell you, one of the biggest changes ever is when we changed the narrative there from barriers to really bridges there. Tell you what we did. Like, guys, we talked yesterday morning about, hey, there's only two paths when all is said and done. You're either a victim or you're a warrior. I mean, when you're a warrior, I have the ability to respond. I'm not just blown around like leaves. I try to work on the skill set so that whatever life hands out, I can do something with it. And that's why, talk to governments, NGOs, go right to the people. So we started doing a thing called warrior training. And I'll tell you what I did. I don't speak Bahasa. It's not one of my languages. Challenging, fourth largest population in the world. I had each one of our sales leaders there. And by the way, today we have 250,000 in Indonesia. There are 18,000 islands. I had her bring the significant other, mostly her husband, to a session. And we did it like this. And there was 2 hours. I had simultaneous translation, and I decided I was going to have fun with this, but I was going to use it to build a bridge so that he could see supporting her made his life better. Sat on a stool there, used some fun videos. And you know what we started out with? The difference between men and women. Rather than it's not fair, we started talking, and I got clinical data, and I had slides there of a man's brain and how many more million cells he had, bigger brain, than a woman's brain. Over here, smaller, but more efficient. She scores 4% higher on all testing in the world. Guys initially were beating their chest, and they said, really? Then we got into other things. The brain is different. Corpus callosum, here's his brain, here's her brain. She has 30% more. Think of corpus callosum as Wi-Fi for the brain. That's why she can multitask. Talk to a guy when he's watching a football game. He's gone deaf. He can't do anything else. By the way, this is genetic, back to how he was bred. His job back then, hunt. Her job, everything else. And Professor, so it still goes in many of the emerging markets of the world. I took this thing further, either communications. Why are women such great communicators? Well, you get better at something when you do it more often. The average woman, and this is what I shared with them, uses 20,000 words a day. He uses 7,000. And that's why typically when he comes home, if he was working that day and she asked him, how was your day? His answer is, fine. Wow, how prolific. But we had fun with it. And I started to see these people really started to loosen up. And he started to think in her in different ways. One of my last slides was a picture of a woman's control panel that controlled emotions, etc. And this was this complex, it looked like missile launch, all the buttons. And then I put a slide on his control panel, on-off switch, okay? The point I'm getting at is what happened after that. Well, let me tell you, 5 years after that, our CAGR, compound annual growth, 30% per year in Indonesia. He started helping her. He started to see, whoa, this may have been the best decision I ever made. Look what I'm tied to. She's an absolute economic machine. And then we found out, we did a study, the Global Fairness Initiative. Washington, D.C. came to us and they said, can we study your emerging markets on the impact of being engaged in this kind of an enterprise? And so we sent them to Indonesia. They did thousands of interviews. We sent them to Mexico. You know what came out? Number one, her engagement with this kind of a platform, her self-image changed from I'm not good enough to I am good enough. And 30% actually said, and I'm a leader. 2, she became connected to other women. 70% got a computer or a smartphone. 3, She moved from lower class to middle class. Professor, these are the kind of things we're talking about needed to change. And let me tell you the thing I'm most proud about. In a world where 1 out of 3 women is abused, often physically, sometime in her life, he went from a belligerent attitude to respect and to really actually helping her. It really works. And so my belief there is on this first one, let's change this narrative and let's talk about it, about leveraging the potential and power of women rather than sitting there saying it's not fair. You say it's not fair, you make a victim of someone. I've got to say too, if you want to go online too, there was a site called Chain of Confidence. I'd encourage you to go to it, and it says under it, inspiring stories. We were pleased and benefit that my wife Susan was an ABC anchor in the largest market in the country, in Los Angeles. Susan, wherever I am out there in the world, she's interviewing women, and the stories that you would hear of them leveraging their power, the from-tos, they're just awe-inspiring to others. Second point I want to make, and I'm only going to make a couple of points. To move it forward faster, we've got to come up with more platforms, more opportunities to engage her in the economic arena. Yes, and I know you guys are going to talk about education is important, but let me give you a reality check on some facts. Because we've got to, you talk about bifurcation, when I talk about the affluent markets of the world and I talk about the emerging markets of the world, hey, come on, 4.5% of the world's population lives in the US, about the same in Europe. There's 2 different worlds going on here, and yet when I hear in the women's movement, mostly in this country, you're talking about glass ceilings, where in the rest of the world you're talking about sticky floors. You're talking here about, well, not equal pay, but then you're talking about in the other markets of the world, my gosh, she doesn't even have a ticket to get in to play in the economic environment. And here we're talking about Me Too, and there we're talking about brutal treatment of her in these markets. So we got to be able to understand what kind of markets we're dealing with, and Western European and American issues are certainly important, but they're more basic for most of the population of the world. There's got to be more platforms out there. We've got to create them. That's the second thing I'm making. And again, education, say yes to that. But here's another one. There's not going to be enough jobs to go around. I headed up the group that was called The Future of Work at Davos, and written articles. You can go on to their sites on the future of work. There's not going to be enough jobs to go around. Here's some fact. We're already at 7.5 billion people. The 50 years ago, the most valuable company in the world was AT&T. It had 750,000 jobs. The most valuable company today, Apple. Although they lost a lot of value yesterday in the market, 100,000 jobs. And so many of my friends, when I was, so often in South Africa, they would say, okay, education is the key because the cavalry is coming. The cavalry is not coming. So yes, get the education, but you better think of some other platforms as well. Another fact, millennials are dominating the world. They're taking over. 58% of them, and I saw a head nodding yesterday when us guys talk about it, 58% of them, they don't want a job. They don't want to spend their life in a cubicle. They don't want to be 9 to 5, which was an invention of Ford Motor Company in 1925. They want to sometimes work at 3 a.m. in the morning. It's a different breed coming along. Now, here is the most important fact of why we've got to do something with regard to new platforms, and it's beyond education. Because right now, 7.5 billion people, 2/3 of that population are already over 18. 2/3. You're sitting there talking, and 5 billion people. They're not coming here to school. They're already past that. So what are we going to do? Say, well, the hell with that. We're going to do these kind of things that this will all kick in, in the next century. What do we do now, starting with what we have today? I always keep on my cell phone, and I shared it with the gang yesterday, that I had it on a slide. I have on this, qualities not measured. Qualities not measured by cognitive tests. Let me read a couple of these to you, and I'm asking you, would you hire somebody who had these qualities but didn't even have an 8th grade education? Self-discipline, persistence, courage, resilience, enthusiasm, reliability, empathy, civic-mindedness, curiosity, endurance, resourcefulness, WDIS. Where do I sign? I want these kinds of people. We did a little video I shared with you that a professor at Harvard has done lots of studies, and she wrote a book called Grit. And she said, what separates those from to those from here? Grit. And this is what brings grit. So how do we engage those other 5 billion people, and half of them are women? We come up with different kinds of platforms to engage in things she already knows, or teach her some new ones. I'll tell you what we did at Tupperware. They call it at Davos the Tupperware effect. You give her training, you microfinance her, she goes out and tastes success, and then she's out on her own and she has confidence. That's how you change it with her. So it really does matter, and you can do something with it, and that's what Uber did for many people. It was hiding in plain sight. She knew how to drive. She knew the local town. All of a sudden, boom, she's engaged. Let me share the last point on this, the third one. We've got to fill the economic pipeline with more women. Fill it now, and to do this, we need to cultivate champions. Champions, mentors, and sponsors. Most of the jobs are controlled by men. Yes, the women's movement is great, but hey, 5% of the Fortune 500 CEOs are women. There's only 6% of the heads of state are women. So we came up with an initiative at the United Nations. We created a group and was proud to be one of the founding sponsors of it, that we really talked about it, he for she. We wanted 10 university presidents, 10 CEOs, 10 heads of state, where we would get in front of the parade and we would get her in there. We need more champions. We need more champions out there who control the gate. They are the gatekeepers. Secondly, sponsors and mentors. Great study done by Bain on LinkedIn. When they evaluated men and women coming into the workforce who had aspirations and confidence to someday be in the C-suite, it was about the same for men and women. When they again checked mid-career, hers had dropped dramatically with regard to her confidence and her belief that it would happen. And you know, one of the single biggest things, what she found out when they did this, study after study under this, it's because he had a boys network in there. He had guys helping him in there. She had to go it alone. Had to go it alone. Anyway, big changes, and it works. I am proud to say we've made a difference in our company. Half our board are women. My successor now, she took over in May as the CEO, is a woman. I've been mentoring her 20 years. She's in her early 50s, and she'll do a great job. 41% of all of our senior management people are women. And by the way, we never did it to check the box. We did it because we saw what a great opportunity. Why not mine it? TNT, today, not tomorrow. Thank you.